The most powerful woman on Wall Street was about to learn that even CEOs can't control everything, especially a crying baby at 35,000 feet. What happened next, between a desperate mother and a stranger from economy class, would change both their lives forever. Welcome to today's incredible true story. Before we dive in, please comment below with your city so I can see how far this story travels around the world. Now let me tell you about the flight that changed everything. Part 1. The first-class cabin of Flight 447 from JFK to Los Angeles hummed with the quiet efficiency of power. Leather seats worth more than most people's monthly salaries cradled titans of industry, each absorbed in their tablets, phones, or the Wall Street Journal. The air itself seemed expensive, filtered, climate-controlled, and heavy with the unspoken understanding that this was where decisions worth billions were made. Amelia Rhodes had earned her place in Seat 2A through 15 years of 18-hour days, missed holidays, and a reputation that had earned her the nickname the Ice Queen in boardrooms from Manhattan to Silicon Valley. At 34, she was the youngest female CEO in her company's 120-year history, commanding a pharmaceutical empire worth $8 billion. Her Hermes handbag sat perfectly aligned beside her laptop, her platinum wedding ring, now worn on her right hand since the divorce, catching the cabin's soft lighting. But today, for the first time in her adult life, Amelia Rhodes was completely, utterly powerless. "Shh, sweetheart, please," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the increasingly frantic cries of 6-month-old Lucas. Her son's face was red and tear-streaked, his tiny fists waving in distress as he arched his back against her chest. "Mommy's here, baby. Mommy's here." The businessman in 1A, Harold Peterson, she recognized him from Forbes covers, shifted in his seat and shot her a look that could have frozen champagne. Behind her, she heard the unmistakable whisper of judgment. "Some people shouldn't fly first class with babies," came a woman's voice just loud enough to be heard. "There are family sections for that sort of thing." Amelia's cheeks burned. She bounced Lucas gently, trying every trick she'd learned in the past 6 months of single motherhood. She'd changed his diaper in the cramped airplane bathroom twice. She'd tried feeding him, singing to him, walking the narrow aisle. Nothing worked. If anything, his cries were getting more desperate. "Ma'am," the flight attendant, Jennifer according to her name tag, approached with the practiced smile of someone trying to maintain cabin peace. "Is there anything I can do to help? I don't know what's wrong," Amelia admitted, her voice cracking slightly. "He was fine during takeoff. He's fed, changed, not running a fever. I don't know." Lucas's cries reached a new octave, and Amelia felt every eye in first class boring into her. These were her peers, her competitors, people who knew her reputation. The woman who had stared down hostile takeovers and made grown men cry in negotiations was being defeated by her own infant son. "Perhaps, Team Hassan," came Harold Peterson's voice, dripping with condescension. "You should consider the comfort of other passengers who paid for a peaceful flight." The words hit Amelia like a physical blow. She knew Harold. They'd been in acquisition talks just last month. He'd called her brilliant then, a force of nature. Now he was looking at her like she was an incompetent child herself. "I'm sorry," she said, standing abruptly. "I'll take him to the back." "Ma'am, we're experiencing some light turbulence," Jennifer said. "I really need you to remain seated with your seatbelt fastened." As if summoned by the flight attendant's words, the plane gave a slight shudder. Lucas's cries intensified now, bordering on screams. Amelia felt tears prick her own eyes. In boardrooms, she was unflappable. Hostile reporters, angry shareholders, skeptical investors. None of them could break her composure. But here, holding her inconsolable son while dozens of judgmental eyes watched her every move, she felt herself crumbling. "This is ridiculous," muttered the woman behind her. Veronica Walsh. Amelia realized, recognizing the voice of the steel heiress. "Flight attendant, surely there's something you can do about this disruption." "I understand your frustration," Jennifer replied diplomatically. "But mothers and infants have the same right to fly as—" "Not when they're disturbing an entire cabin," Harold interrupted. "Some of us have important work to do. I have a presentation to prepare for a board meeting tomorrow that could affect thousands of jobs." Amelia wanted to scream that she too had important work, that she'd been traveling to finalize a drug acquisition that could bring life-saving medications to market faster. But Lucas's cries drowned out any defense she might have offered. She bounced him more vigorously, her movements becoming increasingly frantic. "Come on, baby," she pleaded. "Please, just for Mommy. Please stop crying." The harder she tried, the more agitated Lucas became. His tiny body was rigid with distress, and nothing she did seemed to help. Other passengers weren't even bothering to whisper anymore. "This is what happens when career women think they can have it all," came another voice. "The poor child probably never sees his mother." The comment hit Amelia like a knife between the ribs. The truth was, Lucas saw too much of her lately. Since Richard had left, unable to handle the pressures of her career and the demands of new parenthood, it had been just the two of them. She'd tried to maintain her impossible schedule while being a single mother, and most days she felt like she was failing at both. "Maybe she should have gotten a nanny instead of subjecting the rest of us to this," Harold added, not bothering to lower his voice. Amelia's hands were shaking now. She'd faced down corporate raiders and survived hostile board meetings, but she'd never felt this exposed, this vulnerable. Lucas's cries seemed to echo off the cabin walls, growing louder and more desperate by the minute. Jennifer returned with a small bottle of water. "Sometimes they get thirsty," she offered gently. Amelia accepted it gratefully, but Lucas turned his head away, his cries reaching a pitch that made several passengers wince visibly. She tried walking again, pacing the narrow space in front of her seat, but the turbulence made it dangerous, and Lucas only cried harder. "This is intolerable," Veronica Walsh announced, unbuckling her seatbelt despite the captain's earlier request. "I'm moving to an empty seat in business class." Her dramatic exit prompted others to shift uncomfortably, and Amelia heard whispered requests to flight attendants about changing seats. The message was clear: she and Lucas were pariahs, disturbing the rarefied peace of first class. "I'm so sorry," Amelia said to no one in particular, her voice barely audible over Lucas's wails. "I'm trying everything I can think of." "Well, try harder," came Harold's curt response. The words broke something inside her. Amelia sank into her seat. Lucas pressed against her chest and felt the first tear slide down her cheek. She was Amelia Rhodes, CEO, master of her universe, and she was crying on an airplane because she couldn't comfort her own child. That's when she heard footsteps in the aisle behind her. "Excuse me." The voice was different from the others, deeper, gentler, with a slight rasp that spoke of someone who'd spent time shouting over machinery or sirens. Amelia turned to see a man standing in the aisle and immediately knew he didn't belong in first class. He was tall, probably 6'2", with broad shoulders that strained against a simple blue button-down shirt. His jeans were clean but worn, and his boots had the scuffed look of someone who worked with his hands. His hair was dark with early threads of silver at the temples, and his face had the kind of weathered quality that came from real work, not just stress and late nights in conference rooms. But it was his eyes that stopped her. They were warm brown kind, and completely free of the judgment she'd been drowning in for the past hour. "I couldn't help but hear," he said softly, his gaze moving between Amelia and Lucas. "I have some experience with fussy babies if you'd like some help." The entire first-class cabin fell silent, except for Lucas's continued crying. Harold Peterson's mouth actually fell open. Veronica Walsh, halfway to business class, stopped and stared. This was unprecedented. Someone from economy class didn't just wander into first class, and they certainly didn't offer to help with other people's children. Sir Jennifer appeared as if from thin air, her professional smile strained. "I need to ask you to return to your seat. The captain has asked all passengers to remain seated due to turbulence." "I know," the man said, not taking his eyes off Amelia. "But I also know what it sounds like when a baby is in real distress and when a mother needs help." Amelia stared at him, this stranger who'd appeared like some kind of guardian angel. She should have been embarrassed that her incompetence had drawn attention from economy class. She should have politely declined and maintained what little dignity she had left. Instead, she heard herself say, "What kind of experience?" A small smile crossed his face, transforming his entire appearance. "I raised my daughter mostly on my own from the time she was 8 months old. Spent a lot of nights walking the floors, trying every trick in the book." He paused, his expression softening further. "Sometimes babies just need someone who isn't stressed out holding them." "Sir, really, I must insist," Jennifer tried again. "It's okay," Amelia interrupted, surprising herself. She looked at this stranger, this man who'd broken every unspoken rule of airline social hierarchy to offer help to someone he didn't know. "What's your name?" "Daniel," he said. "Daniel Hayes. And you're doing everything right, by the way. Sometimes they just get overwhelmed, especially on flights. The pressure changes the noise being in an unfamiliar environment. It's a lot for a little guy." His words were the first kind ones she'd heard in over an hour, and Amelia felt fresh tears threaten. "I'm Amelia. This is Lucas. And I honestly don't know what else to try." Daniel's eyes moved to Lucas, who was still crying, but seemed to be wearing himself out. "How old is he?" 6 months. "Teething. Just started, I think. He's been chewing on everything." Daniel nodded knowingly. "That'll do it. The pressure changes from flying make their ears and gums hurt more." He looked at Jennifer, who was still hovering uncertainly. "I promise I'm not trying to cause trouble. I just know this situation, and I know it gets better with a little help." Harold Peterson had had enough. "This is completely inappropriate. Security should be called. You can't just wander around the cabin bothering other passengers." "He's not bothering me," Amelia said quickly, surprised by the force in her own voice. "He's trying to help." "Help?" Harold's voice dripped with disdain. What could some manual laborer possibly know that you don't?" Daniel's jaw tightened slightly at the insult, but his voice remained calm. "I know that babies don't care about social class, and neither does exhaustion. I know what it's like to feel like you're failing as a parent when your child won't stop crying. And I know that sometimes the kindness of strangers makes all the difference." His words hung in the air, and Amelia felt something shift inside her chest. Here was someone who understood. Not the business pressures or the corporate demands, but the fundamental, terrifying vulnerability of being responsible for another human being and feeling completely out of your depth. "Would you?" She started, then stopped, aware of every pair of eyes watching them. "Would you mind trying? I don't know what else to do." The cabin erupted in whispers. Harold Peterson made a sound of disgust. Veronica Walsh openly stared. But Daniel simply nodded and moved closer. "May I?" he asked, extending his arms. Amelia hesitated for just a moment. She didn't know this man. He was a complete stranger who'd wandered up from economy class. But Lucas's cries were breaking her heart, and there was something in Daniel's expression, a confidence born of experience, a kindness that seemed genuine, that made her trust him. She carefully transferred Lucas to Daniel's arms. The change was almost immediate, not silent. Lucas was still crying, but different. Daniel held him with the easy confidence of someone who'd done this thousands of times. He supported Lucas's head perfectly, cradled his body just right, and began to sway gently. "Hey there, little man," Daniel murmured, his voice pitched low and soothing. I know. Everything's scary and loud, and nothing feels right. But you're okay. You're safe." Lucas's cries began to quiet slightly more from exhaustion than comfort, but it was progress. Daniel continued swaying, his large hands completely gentle as he adjusted his hold. "Sometimes they just need to hear a different voice," he explained quietly to Amelia. "You've been stressed, and babies pick up on that energy, no fault of yours. Any mother would be stressed in this situation." The simple validation brought fresh tears to Amelia's eyes. For weeks, she'd been questioning every decision, wondering if she was damaging Lucas somehow by trying to balance work and motherhood. Richard's parting words, that she'd never be able to put family first, echoed in her mind constantly. "How did you—" she started, then stopped. "Learn to do this," Daniel finished. "Trial by fire. My wife died when our daughter Sophie was 8 months old. Sudden illness, nothing anyone could have prevented. One day I was the dad who came home from work and helped with bedtime stories. The next day I was a single father who had to figure out everything from scratch." The casual way he mentioned such a devastating loss took Amelia's breath away. "I'm so sorry. Thank you. It was 7 years ago now. Sophie's 8, and we've figured out how to be a family of 2. He looked down at Lucas, whose cries had diminished to tired hiccups. "The hardest part isn't the practical stuff. Feeding, changing, all that. It's the moments when you feel like you're failing them, like they deserve better than what you can give." His words hit so close to home that Amelia had to bite her lip to keep from sobbing. "That's exactly how I feel. But here's what I learned." Daniel continued, still swaying gently with Lucas. "Kids don't need perfect parents. They need present ones. They need love, consistency, and someone who keeps trying even when everything goes wrong." He smiled down at Lucas, who was finally starting to calm. "And this little guy, he knows you love him. That's what matters." The plane hit another patch of turbulence, and Daniel automatically adjusted his stance to keep Lucas stable. Amelia noticed how natural the movement was, how completely comfortable he seemed holding her son. "You're very good at this," she said softly. "Practice," Daniel replied. "Lots and lots of practice. Sophie went through a phase around this age where she would only sleep if I was walking with her. I logged probably 1,000 miles pacing our apartment at 3 a.m. Lucas's breathing was starting to even out, his little body relaxing against Daniel's chest. The transformation was remarkable. 15 minutes ago, he'd been inconsolable. Now he was getting drowsy. "How?" Amelia started, then shook her head. "I've tried everything you're doing. Why isn't it working when I do it?" "Because you're his mom," Daniel said simply. "You're the most important person in his world, which means your stress affects him more than anyone else's. When you're wound up, he gets wound up. It's not your fault. It's biology." He began humming something under his breath, a soft melody that Amelia didn't recognize. Lucas's eyes were getting heavy. "What song is that?" she asked. Daniel's expression grew tender. Something my wife used to sing. Sophie loved it when she was little, and it seems to work for other babies too. The fact that he was sharing something so personal with a stranger moved Amelia profoundly. This man had lost his wife, raised a daughter alone, and was now offering comfort to a woman he'd never met, and a baby who wasn't his responsibility. "I don't understand why you're helping us," she said quietly. Daniel looked at her with those kind brown eyes. "Because someone helped me once. When Sophie was about Lucas's age, we were on a bus in Chicago. I was there for a job interview. She started screaming just like this, and I couldn't get her to stop. I was exhausted, overwhelmed, convinced everyone was judging me for being a single dad who couldn't handle his own kid." He paused, adjusting his hold as Lucas settled more comfortably against him. This elderly woman got up from her seat and walked over. She didn't ask permission, didn't introduce herself. She just looked at Sophie and started singing in Spanish, this beautiful lullaby. Sophie stopped crying almost immediately. The woman held her for 20 minutes while I just sat there and tried not to fall apart. Amelia felt her throat tighten. "What did you say to her?" I tried to thank her, but she just smiled and said, "Babies don't belong to just their parents. They belong to all of us. We all have a responsibility to help when we can." Daniel's voice was soft with memory. I never forgot that. And I promised myself that if I ever saw another parent struggling the way I was struggling, I'd try to help. The simple humanity of it overwhelmed her. In her world of corporate mergers and hostile takeovers, genuine kindness was rare. People helped when there was something to gain, when favors could be called in later. But this man was helping simply because it was the right thing to do. Lucas was almost asleep now, his breathing deep and even. The first-class cabin, which had been buzzing with whispered criticisms, had fallen completely silent. Even Harold Peterson seemed transfixed by the sight of this stranger soothing a baby with such ease. "I should probably get him back to you before he falls completely asleep," Daniel said quietly. "Otherwise, he might wake up when I transfer him back." Amelia nodded, though part of her wanted to let Daniel hold Lucas for the rest of the flight. For the first time in months, she felt like she could breathe properly. The transfer back was seamless. Daniel placed Lucas in her arms with the same careful confidence he'd shown throughout, and miraculously, the baby stayed calm. His little fist curled around Amelia's finger, and his breathing remained steady. "How did you do that?" she whispered, afraid to speak too loudly and disturb the peace. "Sometimes they just need a reset," Daniel explained. "When they get overwhelmed, they can't calm down on their own, even when they want to. Having someone else hold them breaks the cycle." "Thank you." Amelia said the words completely inadequate for what he'd just done for her. "I don't know how to repay you." Daniel smiled. "You don't need to repay me. Just remember that you're doing better than you think you are. Being a parent is the hardest job in the world, and you're doing it alone. That takes incredible strength." Jennifer appeared beside them, her expression apologetic but firm. "Sir, I really do need you to return to your seat now. We're expecting more turbulence." Daniel nodded, but before he could leave, Amelia reached out and touched his arm. "Wait," she said impulsively. "What's your daughter's name again?" "Sophie." Daniel said, his face lighting up. "Sophie Hayes. She's 8 and she's the best thing I've ever done with my life." "Tell me about her." Daniel's expression grew warm. "She's brilliant. Too smart for her own good sometimes. She loves art and science in equal measure, which makes for some interesting projects around the house. Last week she tried to recreate the solar system using different types of pasta." He chuckled. "She's kind like her mother was, but she's got this fierce independence that I think she gets from having to grow up a little faster than other kids." She sounds wonderful. She is. She's also the one who told me I should help you. Amelia blinked in surprise. What? Daniel glanced toward the back of the plane. She's with me back in row 34. When your little guy started crying, she said it sounded like he was really scared and that someone should help him. When I hesitated, because honestly, walking into first class to offer help isn't exactly normal, she gave me this look and said, "Dad, what if it was me crying and no one helped?" The image of an 8-year-old girl encouraging her father to help a stranger brought fresh tears to Amelia's eyes. She raised you right. Actually, I think we're raising each other, Daniel said. But I should get back to her before she decides to come looking for me herself. Sir, Jennifer said again, more urgently this time. Of course, Daniel said. He looked back at Amelia. You're going to be fine. Both of you, trust yourself. As he turned to go, Amelia called after him. Daniel. He stopped and looked back. Where are you flying to LA? Yeah, I'm an engineer. There's a conference I'm attending. Business meetings, she said, then hesitated. Maybe we could get coffee sometime. I mean, if you're not too busy. I'd love to meet Sophie properly. And Daniel's smile was genuine and warm. I'd like that. We're staying at the Marriott downtown if you want to call. And then he was gone, walking back through the cabin dividers toward economy class. Amelia watched him go, this ordinary man who'd done something extraordinary simply because it was kind. Lucas stirred slightly in her arms, but didn't wake. The plane hit another patch of turbulence, but this time Amelia felt steady. She looked around the first-class cabin and realized that the atmosphere had changed. The hostile stares were gone, replaced by something that looked almost like respect. Harold Peterson caught her eye and gave her a small nod. Better, he asked quietly. Much better, thank you. Even Veronica Walsh had returned to her original seat. She leaned forward slightly and said, He's a beautiful baby. The simple kindness in her voice was a stark contrast to her earlier comments, and Amelia realized that witnessing Daniel's compassion had affected everyone in the cabin. Thank you, Amelia replied. I think so too. Jennifer appeared with a warm smile. Can I get you anything? Some tea, maybe. You look like you could use it. That would be wonderful. As the flight attendant walked away, Amelia settled back in her seat with Lucas sleeping peacefully in her arms. For the first time in months, she felt like maybe, just maybe, she wasn't failing at this motherhood thing after all. She thought about Daniel's words that children needed present parents, not perfect ones. That love and consistency mattered more than having all the answers. That sometimes the kindness of strangers could change everything. Outside the window, clouds stretched endlessly in all directions, and somewhere behind her, in row 34, a man named Daniel Hayes was probably telling his 8-year-old daughter Sophie that sometimes helping others was as simple as extending your arms when someone needed them. Amelia closed her eyes, and for the first time in a very long time, allowed herself to believe that everything might actually be okay. The remainder of the flight passed in a haze of peaceful quiet that Amelia had never thought possible. Lucas slept soundly against her chest, his tiny fingers still curled around hers, while she found herself stealing glances toward the back of the plane where Daniel and his daughter Sophie were seated. She couldn't see them from her position, but knowing they were there brought an unexpected comfort. When the captain announced their descent into Los Angeles, Amelia felt a strange reluctance to let the flight end. This suspended moment in time, where kindness had transformed, everything felt too precious to leave behind. As the plane touched down and taxied to the gate, she carefully gathered her belongings while keeping Lucas secure in her arms. The first-class passengers filed out with their usual efficiency, but the atmosphere remained different from when they'd boarded. Harold Peterson actually smiled at Lucas as he passed, and Veronica Walsh paused to whisper, "Safe travels, dear." Amelia waited until the cabin had mostly cleared before making her way toward the exit, Lucas now awake but content in her arms. As she approached the economy section, she slowed, hoping to catch sight of Daniel and Sophie. The rows were still crowded with passengers gathering their belongings, and she almost missed them. Then she heard a young voice, bright and curious, saying, "Dad, is that the lady with the baby you helped?" Amelia turned to see Daniel standing in the aisle, reaching into an overhead compartment, while beside him stood a girl who could only be Sophie. She was small for 8, with her father's warm brown eyes and dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Her jeans had paint stains on the knees, and she wore a t-shirt decorated with planets and stars. "Sophie," Daniel said, gently pulling down a worn backpack. "Remember what we talked about? Sometimes adults need space to—" "It's okay," Amelia interrupted, stepping closer. "You must be Sophie. I'm Amelia, and this is Lucas." Sophie's face lit up with genuine interest. "He's so little. Was he really crying that much?" It sounded like he was really scared. The directness of children never failed to surprise Amelia. In her world, people rarely said exactly what they meant. "He was scared," she confirmed. "Flying can be frightening when you're little. Your dad helped him feel better." "My dad's really good with babies," Sophie said proudly. "He had to learn everything when my mom died. He even learned how to braid hair, but he's not very good at it yet." Daniel's cheeks reddened slightly. "Sophie tends to overshare," he said apologetically. "I think it's refreshing," Amelia replied honestly. "Most people I know are afraid to say what they're really thinking." Sophie studied her with the intense focus children bring to sizing up adults. "Are you rich? You were sitting in the fancy seats." "Sophie," Daniel warned, but Amelia laughed. "I suppose I am," she said. "Does that bother you?" Sophie considered this seriously. "Not if you're nice to people. Rich people can be nice or mean just like everyone else. But some of them think money makes them better than other people, which is silly." The wisdom in the observation, delivered with such matter-of-fact confidence, struck Amelia deeply. This 8-year-old had articulated something that had taken Amelia years to understand about her own world. "You're very smart," Amelia told her. "Your dad must be proud." "He says I'm too smart for my own good sometimes," Sophie replied with a grin that was pure mischief. "Especially when I ask questions he doesn't want to answer." Daniel shouldered his backpack and stepped into the aisle. "We should probably let people pass," he said, glancing at the line of passengers behind them. "Of course," Amelia said, but she didn't want this moment to end. "I meant what I said about coffee. I know you mentioned the Marriott downtown." "We are staying there," Daniel confirmed. "But I don't want you to feel obligated because I helped with Lucas. That's not why I know why you helped," Amelia interrupted gently. "And that's exactly why I'd like to see you again. Both of you," she added, smiling at Sophie. Sophie's eyes widened with excitement. "Really? Could we show her the Science Museum, Dad? They have that new exhibit about space." Daniel looked between his daughter and Amelia, clearly weighing the unusual nature of the situation. "If you're sure," he said finally. "Sophie's been wanting to see that exhibit, and I have to admit, it would be nice to have another adult to talk to at a children's museum." "It's a date then," Amelia said, then quickly corrected herself. "I mean, it's a plan. Tomorrow afternoon, maybe." "Perfect," Daniel said. "Should we meet in the hotel lobby around 1? I'll be there." As they moved off the plane together, Amelia found herself in the strange position of walking beside people who felt more like family than many of her actual relatives. Sophie chattered about everything she could see through the terminal windows, while Daniel carried both their bags with easy efficiency. At the baggage claim, they waited together in comfortable silence, punctuated by Sophie's observations about fellow travelers. When Daniel's battered duffel bag appeared on the carousel, Sophie pointed it out with the keen eye of someone used to watching for their belongings. "There's ours, Dad, with the green strap you put on so we could find it easier." Daniel retrieved the bag and turned back to Amelia. "What about yours?" "I just have carry-on," she said, indicating her sleek wheeled bag and designer purse. "I don't usually pack much for business trips." Sophie studied Amelia's luggage with interest. "How long are you staying in LA?" "3 days," Amelia replied. "I have meetings tomorrow morning and Wednesday, then I fly back to New York Wednesday evening." "That's not very long for a vacation," Sophie observed. "It's not a vacation, sweetheart," Daniel explained. "Amelia's here for work like Dad's conference." Sophie's brow furrowed. "Don't you ever take vacations?" The innocent question hit harder than Amelia expected. When was the last time she'd taken a real vacation? Not a working weekend in the Hamptons or a company retreat, but actual time off where she wasn't checking emails or taking calls. "Not very often," she admitted. "My job keeps me pretty busy." "That sounds lonely," Sophie said with the brutal honesty of childhood. The words hung in the air as they made their way toward the exit. Daniel shot his daughter a warning look, but Amelia found herself moved by the simple observation. Lonely. Yes, she supposed it was. Outside, the Los Angeles evening was warm and bright, so different from the gray December weather they'd left behind in New York. Palm trees lined the pickup area, and the air had that particular quality of possibility that seemed to exist only in California. "Can we share a taxi?" Sophie asked, looking between the adults hopefully. "It would be better for the environment, and we're going to the same place anyway." Daniel looked embarrassed. "Sophie, I'm sure Amelia has her own transportation arranged." "Actually, I don't," Amelia said. "I was planning to get a cab or rideshare. Sharing makes perfect sense." The ride into downtown was filled with Sophie's running commentary on the city. She pressed her face to the window, exclaiming over the palm trees, the sprawling freeways, the mountains visible in the distance. Her excitement was infectious, and Amelia found herself seeing Los Angeles through fresh eyes. "Have you been to California before?" Daniel asked. "Many times, but always for work," Amelia replied. "Usually I'm in conference rooms or hotel restaurants. I don't think I've ever really looked at it." "Dad says traveling for work isn't really traveling," Sophie piped up. "He says you have to explore places to understand them." "Your daughter has a lot of opinions," Amelia observed with amusement. "She gets that from her mother," Daniel said softly. "Emma always said the world was too interesting to experience secondhand." The mention of his wife brought a momentary quiet to the taxi. Amelia could see the love and loss in Daniel's expression, the way he still carried his wife's memory with him like a treasured photograph. "She sounds like she was a wonderful person," Amelia said gently. "She was," Sophie said matter-of-factly. "I don't remember her very much because I was little when she died, but Dad tells me stories. He says she would have liked you." Daniel's eyes widened slightly. "Sophie, you can't just—" "Why not?" Sophie asked innocently. "Mom liked people who were smart and kind. Amelia's smart because she runs a big company, and she's kind because she said thank you for helping with Lucas and didn't act mean to us even though we're not rich." The 8-year-old's logic was flawless and utterly disarming. Amelia felt something warm unfold in her chest, a feeling she couldn't quite name. "Thank you, Sophie," she said. "That's one of the nicest compliments I've ever received." The Marriott downtown was exactly what Amelia had expected. Efficient, clean, and utterly forgettable. The kind of place where business travelers stayed because it was convenient, not because it was memorable. As they stood in the lobby saying goodbye, she felt an unexpected reluctance to part ways. 1 o'clock tomorrow, Daniel confirmed. "I'll be here," Amelia promised. "Sophie, I'm looking forward to learning about space from an expert." Sophie beamed. "I know all the planets and most of the constellations. Dad says I should be an astronaut, but I think I want to be a scientist who discovers new planets instead." "That sounds like an excellent plan," Amelia said seriously. "The universe needs more people asking big questions." As they parted ways at the elevators, Daniel and Sophie heading to the 10th floor while Amelia went to the 20th, she found herself smiling in a way that felt unfamiliar. When was the last time she'd looked forward to something that wasn't related to work or achievement? Her suite was everything she'd requested. Spacious, quiet, with a view of the city, and a workspace equipped with everything she needed for tomorrow's meetings. She'd stayed in dozens of similar rooms over the years, but tonight it felt different. Tonight it felt lonely. Lucas was getting fussy again, probably hungry, and as she prepared his bottle, Amelia found herself thinking about Daniel's easy confidence with babies, the way he'd held Lucas like it was the most natural thing in the world. She thought about Sophie's bright curiosity and direct honesty, so different from the careful calculations that governed most of her interactions. After feeding Lucas and getting him settled for the night, Amelia stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows looking out at the glittering sprawl of Los Angeles. Somewhere below in this same building were two people who had changed something fundamental about her day, and maybe about her. She pulled out her phone to check emails, an automatic habit that usually consumed her evenings. But tonight, as she scrolled through the usual parade of urgent requests and strategic updates, she found herself distracted. The words on the screen seemed less important than they had this morning. Instead, she found herself Googling things like Best Children's Science Museums, Los Angeles, and what 8-year-olds like to do for fun. She'd never spent time with a child. Sophie's age had never really thought about what might interest them beyond the abstract concept of kid-friendly activities. Her phone buzzed with a text from her assistant. Peterson Industries reached out about rescheduling tomorrow's 3 p.m. Apparently, Harold Peterson was impressed by something that happened on your flight and wants to discuss the merger personally. Amelia stared at the message, remembering Harold's disapproving stares when Lucas was crying his transformation after Daniel's intervention. The idea that witnessing simple human kindness had somehow influenced a billion-dollar business deal felt surreal. She typed back, "Reschedule for Wednesday morning. I have other plans tomorrow afternoon." It was the first time in years she'd prioritized anything personal over a potential business opportunity, and it felt both terrifying and exhilarating. The next morning arrived with California sunshine streaming through her windows and Lucas babbling happily in his portable crib. Amelia's morning meetings went smoothly. A pharmaceutical acquisition that would expand their oncology division, discussions about regulatory approval timelines, the usual maze of complex negotiations that had defined her career. But throughout the morning, she found herself checking the time, anticipating 1 o'clock, with an eagerness that surprised her. When her final meeting concluded at 11:30, she realized she had time to do something she'd never done before: shop for a child. The hotel concierge directed her to a nearby shopping district, and Amelia found herself in the strange position of browsing toy stores with no idea what an 8-year-old girl might want. Everything seemed either too young or too old, too pink or too generic. Finally, in a small educational toy shop, she found something that felt right. A beautiful telescope designed for children with star charts and a guidebook about astronomy. If Sophie wanted to discover new planets, maybe she needed better tools for looking at the ones that already existed. Back at the hotel, she changed into jeans and a sweater, the most casual clothes she'd packed, and made her way to the lobby with Lucas in his stroller and the telescope gift bag in her hand. She felt nervous in a way that had nothing to do with business deals or high-stakes negotiations. Daniel and Sophie were already waiting by the lobby seating area. Daniel wore khakis and a polo shirt that brought out the warm brown of his eyes, while Sophie had on a sundress decorated with planets and moons that was clearly her choice rather than her father's. "Amelia," Sophie called out, waving enthusiastically. "You came." "Of course I came," Amelia replied, surprised by the suggestion that she might not have. "I've been looking forward to this all morning." Sophie's eyes immediately went to the gift bag. "Is that for me?" "Sophie," Daniel said reproachfully. "That's not polite to ask." "It's okay," Amelia said, handing over the bag. "I saw this and thought you might like it." Sophie opened the bag with the careful reverence of a child who didn't receive surprise gifts very often. When she saw the telescope, her face lit up like sunrise. "Dad, look, it's a real telescope. Now I can see the planets up close." Daniel examined the telescope with appreciation. "This is beautiful, Amelia. But it's too much. You barely know us." "I know enough," Amelia said simply. "I know Sophie wants to discover new worlds, and I know you taught her that helping others matters more than social conventions. That's enough for me." Sophie was already reading the instruction manual with the intense focus she seemed to bring to everything. "Dad, can we set this up in our room tonight? The book says Venus should be visible just after sunset." "We'll see," Daniel said, but his smile suggested the answer was yes. He looked at Amelia with something that might have been wonder. "Thank you. This is incredibly generous." "It's nothing," Amelia said, though she realized that wasn't true. It wasn't nothing. It was something entirely new for her, this impulse to give without expecting anything in return. The California Science Center was everything Sophie had promised and more. The space exhibit was spectacular, with interactive displays that brought the solar system to life in ways that captivated both Sophie and, to her surprise, Amelia herself. "Look at this," Sophie called from a display about exoplanets. "Scientists have found over 4,000 planets outside our solar system. Some of them might have water and life." Amelia found herself drawn into Sophie's enthusiasm, asking questions and reading display placards with genuine interest. When was the last time she'd learned something just for the joy of learning, without any business application or strategic purpose? Daniel pushed Lucas's stroller through the exhibits, occasionally lifting the baby out to show him the colorful displays. Lucas seemed fascinated by the moving models and twinkling lights, his small hands reaching toward the artificial stars. "He likes it," Sophie observed, gently touching Lucas's tiny fist. "Babies are smarter than people think. I bet he understands more than we know." They spent 3 hours exploring the museum, with Sophie serving as an enthusiastic tour guide who knew surprisingly sophisticated details about space exploration, marine biology, and renewable energy. Her knowledge was broad and deep, clearly the result of a curious mind encouraged to ask questions. "How does she know so much?" Amelia asked Daniel as they watched Sophie explain planetary rotation to Lucas, who listened with the serious attention babies sometimes give to complex topics. "She reads everything she can get her hands on," Daniel said proudly. "The library is our second home. After Emma died, I was working long hours trying to keep us afloat financially, and Sophie spent a lot of time with my neighbor, Mrs. Chen, who's a retired science teacher. Mrs. Chen encouraged Sophie's questions instead of just giving simple answers. That's wonderful. Not every child gets that kind of intellectual encouragement. Daniel glanced at her curiously. What was it like for you growing up? Did your parents encourage your questions? The question caught Amelia off guard. She rarely thought about her childhood, and even more rarely discussed it. My parents were focused on achievement. Questions were fine as long as they led to measurable success. Grades, test scores, college admissions, career advancement. The goal was always the next level up. That sounds exhausting. It was effective, Amelia said automatically, then paused. But yes, I suppose it was exhausting too. Sophie bounded back to them, her face glowing with excitement. Can we go see the marine life exhibit next? They have a touch tank with sea anemones. As they moved through the museum, Amelia found herself observing the easy rhythm between Daniel and Sophie. He never talked down to her, never dismissed her questions as childish or irrelevant. When she got excited about something, he matched her enthusiasm rather than dampening it with adult practicality. Dad, look at this shark tooth, Sophie called from a fossil display. It's from a megalodon. They were the biggest sharks that ever lived. That's incredible, Daniel said, examining the fossil with genuine interest. How big do you think megalodons were compared to modern sharks? Way bigger, like as big as a school bus. But they went extinct millions of years ago, so we don't have to worry about them eating us. That's a relief, Amelia said seriously, earning a giggle from Sophie. In the marine life section, Sophie insisted that Lucas needed to feel the texture of a sea anemone. With careful supervision, she helped guide his tiny hand into the touch tank. See, Lucas. It feels weird and squishy, but it won't hurt you. Sea anemones are actually animals, not plants, even though they look like flowers. Lucas seemed more interested in the sensation than the science lesson, but he didn't cry or pull away. Amelia watched amazed by Sophie's gentle patience with the baby. You're very good with him, she told Sophie. I like babies, Sophie replied matter-of-factly. They're honest about what they want, and they don't care if you're wearing the right clothes or live in the right house. Plus, everything is new to them, which is exciting. And the simple wisdom in her words struck Amelia deeply. This child saw the world with such clarity, such freedom from the social calculations that governed adult interactions. As they explored the final exhibit, a hands-on engineering challenge where visitors could build bridges and test their strength, Amelia found herself working alongside Sophie to construct a suspension bridge out of straws and string. The key is distribution of weight, Sophie explained seriously. You can't put all the stress in one place or the whole thing falls down. That's true about more than just bridges, Amelia observed. Sophie looked at her with those wise 8-year-old eyes. Are you talking about life stuff? Maybe I am. Dad says that sometimes too, that you have to balance things or everything gets wobbly. Daniel joined them carrying Lucas, who was getting sleepy in the warm afternoon. How's the engineering project going? Amelia's really good at this, Mouth, Sophie reported. She thinks about problems the same way I do. High praise from the expert, Daniel said with a smile. Their bridge held when they added test weights, and Sophie cheered as if they'd achieved something genuinely significant. Maybe they had, Amelia thought. When was the last time she'd celebrated a small victory just for the joy of accomplishment, without any thought of how it advanced her larger goals? As they left the museum, Sophie was already planning their next adventure. Tomorrow we could go to the beach. Lucas would like feeling sand, and I could show you how to look for shells. Actually, Daniel said gently, Amelia has to work tomorrow, remember? And we fly home tomorrow evening. Sophie's face fell slightly. Oh, Right. I forgot about work. Amelia felt an unexpected pang at the disappointment in Sophie's voice. What time is your flight? She found herself asking. 7 p.m., Daniel replied. Sophie has school Thursday, so we need to get back. I don't fly out until 8, Amelia said impulsively. Maybe we could meet for an early dinner before you head to the airport. If you want to, I mean. Sophie's face lit up again. Yes. Could we go somewhere with good dessert? Daniel looked between them, clearly moved by his daughter's obvious affection for Amelia. If you're sure you have time. I'm sure, Amelia said, and realized she meant it completely. They spent the evening in the hotel restaurant, where Sophie entertained them with detailed explanations of her school projects, while Lucas dozed contentedly in his carrier. The conversation flowed easily, jumping from Sophie's art class to Daniel's engineering work, to Amelia's attempts to explain pharmaceutical development in 8-year-old terms. So you make medicines that help sick people get better? Sophie asked, working her way through an enormous slice of chocolate cake. That's the goal, Amelia confirmed. Sometimes it takes years to develop one medicine, and we have to test it very carefully to make sure it's safe. That's really important work, Sophie said seriously. My friend Jake's mom has cancer, and the medicines she takes make her feel better, so she can come to school events and stuff. The casual way Sophie connected Amelia's abstract corporate work to real human impact was both humbling and profound. In boardrooms and conference calls, it was easy to lose sight of the people behind the profit margins. It is important, Amelia agreed. Sometimes I forget that when I'm worried about all the business parts of it. Dad says the business parts matter too, though, Sophie said, glancing at Daniel. He says if companies can't make money helping people, they'll stop trying to help people. Daniel looked slightly embarrassed. Sophie absorbs every conversation, even ones she's not supposed to be listening to. She's not wrong, Amelia said. That's a very sophisticated understanding of how the world works. As the evening wound down, Amelia found herself reluctant to say goodbye. These two people had somehow become important to her in the span of less than 24 hours, and the thought of returning to New York, to her empty apartment and her demanding schedule, felt suddenly unappealing. I have something for you too, Sophie announced, pulling a folded piece of paper from her backpack. I drew this for you and Lucas. Amelia unfolded the paper to reveal a beautiful crayon drawing of an airplane flying through a starry sky. Stick figures in the windows showed a woman holding a baby, and below them 2 other figures, clearly Daniel and Sophie, were waving up at the plane. It's from yesterday, Sophie explained, when Dad helped Lucas stop crying and everyone became friends. The simple drawing captured something essential about their unlikely connection, and Amelia felt her throat tighten with emotion. This is beautiful, Sophie. I'm going to frame it and hang it in my office. Really, even though I'm not a very good artist yet. Especially because you drew it with love, Amelia said. That's what makes art valuable. As they prepared to part ways, Daniel hesitated, then said, I know this is probably strange given how we met, but would you like to stay in touch? Sophie's become quite attached to you, and honestly, so have I. As friends, I mean. The qualification at the end made Amelia smile. I'd like that very much. As friends. They exchanged phone numbers and email addresses, and Sophie made Amelia promise to send pictures of Lucas as he grew. And you have to tell me if you discover any new planets with the telescope, Amelia told Sophie. I will. And you have to remember that work isn't the only important thing in life. The 8-year-old's parting wisdom followed Amelia back to her room, where she sat by the window looking out at the city lights while Lucas slept peacefully nearby. Tomorrow, she would return to New York to board meetings and acquisition strategies and the relentless pace of corporate leadership. But something had shifted during these 2 days in Los Angeles. She'd glimpsed a different way of moving through the world, one that prioritized connection over achievement, curiosity over efficiency, kindness over competition. Her phone buzzed with the usual cascade of emails, but for the first time in years, Amelia didn't immediately reach for it. Instead, she looked at Sophie's drawing propped against the lamp on her bedside table and smiled. The return flight to New York felt like traveling backward through time. As Amelia settled into her first-class seat with Lucas, she was acutely aware of how different everything felt from just 3 days ago. The same leather seats, the same filtered air, the same subtle hum of wealth and power. But she was no longer the same person who had boarded this flight in crisis. Lucas was alert and curious, reaching for the small window shade and babbling contentedly. Other passengers smiled at him, rather than glaring, and Amelia realized that her own energy had fundamentally changed. She was calmer, more present, and Lucas reflected that peace back to her. During takeoff, she thought about Daniel and Sophie, who were somewhere over the Midwest by now, probably playing 20 questions or working on homework together. The image made her smile, and she pulled out her phone to send a quick text. "Safe travels. Sophie's drawing is going straight to my office wall when I get back." The response came quickly. "She's thrilled you like it. She's already planning what to draw next. Thank you again for everything. Daniel." Such a simple message, but it carried the warmth of genuine friendship. When was the last time someone had texted her without wanting something work-related in return? The weeks that followed brought an unexpected rhythm to Amelia's life. Text messages with Sophie became a daily occurrence. Photos of science projects, questions about how medicines worked, updates on planets visible through her new telescope. Daniel's messages were less frequent, but equally welcome, usually sharing Sophie's latest observations about the world, or asking for advice about navigating single parenthood in a complex world. "Sophie asked me why some people are mean to others just because they have less money," Daniel texted one evening. Any wisdom for a dad who's struggling to explain economic inequality to an 8-year-old? Amelia found herself thinking carefully about her response, remembering her own childhood questions that had been dismissed or oversimplified. Tell her it's because some people forget that money is just a tool, not a measure of someone's worth. The challenge is remembering to see people as people, not as what they have or don't have. Perfect. She says that makes sense and that you must be really smart about people stuff. These exchanges became anchors in Amelia's demanding schedule. Board meetings felt less urgent when she knew Sophie was waiting to hear about her day. Corporate negotiations seemed smaller against the backdrop of an 8-year-old's genuine curiosity about the world. The change didn't go unnoticed. At a pharmaceutical industry conference in Chicago, Harold Peterson, who had been so hostile on the plane, approached her during a coffee break. "Amelia, I have to ask," he said, stirring sugar into his coffee with deliberate precision. "Something's different about you since our flight to LA. You seem... I don't know how to put this without sounding presumptuous. More grounded." Amelia considered how to respond. The truth was that she felt more grounded, but explaining why felt impossible. How could she tell this titan of industry that befriending a widowed engineer and his 8-year-old daughter had changed her perspective on everything? "I've been thinking about what really matters," she said finally. "Sometimes crisis forces clarity." Harold nodded thoughtfully. "That man who helped with your son, that was something remarkable. I've been thinking about it ever since. The way he just stepped in, no agenda, no expectation of reward. When did we stop doing that for each other?" The question stayed with Amelia through the rest of the conference. When had kindness become so rare in her world that witnessing it felt revolutionary? Back in New York, she found herself making small changes. She started leaving the office earlier on Fridays, using the time to take Lucas to Central Park or children's museums. She implemented a new policy at her company: paid parental leave for all employees, not just executives. She began asking her assistant about her family, actually listening to the answers instead of treating them as pleasantries. "Ms. Rhodes," her assistant Jennifer said one afternoon, "I hope you don't mind me saying, but you seem happier lately. More approachable." Amelia looked up from the quarterly reports she'd been reviewing. Jennifer had worked for her for 3 years, but this was the first time she'd offered a personal observation. "Do I?" Amelia asked. "I hope that doesn't mean I'm getting soft in negotiations." Jennifer laughed. "Oh no, definitely not. If anything, you seem more effective. People want to work with you now instead of just for you. There's a difference." That evening, Amelia shared the conversation with Daniel during one of their increasingly frequent phone calls. These conversations had evolved from brief updates about their children to longer discussions about work life and the challenges of balancing personal fulfillment with professional responsibilities. People respond to authenticity, Daniel said, his voice warm through the phone speaker, while Amelia fed Lucas his evening bottle. "When you're genuinely present with someone, they can feel it." Sophie's teacher says the same thing. Kids know immediately if you really care or if you're just going through the motions. "How does Sophie like school this year?" Amelia asked. She'd grown genuinely fond of hearing about Sophie's adventures and insights. "She loves it, but she's been asking some tough questions lately. Yesterday she wanted to know why some kids at school don't have enough food for lunch, while others have more than they can eat." Amelia felt a familiar tug in her chest. Sophie's questions always cut straight to the heart of complex issues with the clarity that only children possessed. "What did you tell her?" "The truth as best I could explain it. That the world isn't always fair, but that's why it's important for people who have enough to help people who don't. She's been saving her allowance to donate to the school's food program." The image of Sophie carefully counting quarters and dimes to help classmates she barely knew brought tears to Amelia's eyes. This child, who had so little compared to Amelia's wealth, was thinking constantly about how to help others. "She's remarkable, Daniel. You both are." "She's definitely her mother's daughter," Daniel said softly. "Emma always saw the world in terms of how she could make it better, never how it could benefit her." And these mentions of Emma had become more frequent in their conversations, and Amelia had learned to recognize them as gifts. Daniel sharing pieces of his past that still shaped his present. She never pushed for details, but she treasured each glimpse into the love that had created the family she'd come to care about so deeply. "I wish I could have met her," Amelia said. "I think you would have liked each other," Daniel replied. "Emma always said that smart women needed to stick together in a world that often underestimated them." The conversation was interrupted by Lucas dropping his bottle and beginning to fuss. As Amelia shifted him to her shoulder to burp him, she realized how natural these domestic moments had become, how the sound of Daniel's voice in the background made even ordinary evenings feel warmer. "I should let you go," Daniel said, clearly hearing Lucas's protests. "Give that little guy a hug from his California friends." After hanging up, Amelia found herself looking around her pristine Manhattan apartment with new eyes. Everything was beautiful, expensive, perfectly curated. But it was also cold, impersonal, more like a magazine spread than a home where a family actually lived. That weekend, she did something unprecedented. She took Lucas shopping for toys. Not educational toys or developmentally appropriate items recommended by experts, but actual fun toys that would make noise and create mess and bring joy. A set of colorful building blocks on a musical keyboard with flashing lights, a collection of board books with bright pictures and simple stories. Lucas's delight with his new treasures was infectious. He banged on the keyboard with enthusiasm, built wobbly towers with the blocks, and insisted on having the same book read to him 5 times in a row. The apartment filled with sounds it had never heard before. Baby laughter, off-key piano music, the gentle chaos of play. Amelia found herself taking pictures, constantly wanting to capture every moment of Lucas's discovery and joy. She sent the best ones to Daniel and Sophie, who responded with enthusiasm and pictures of their own recent adventures. "Lucas is getting so big," Sophie texted back along with a photo of herself conducting a science experiment in their kitchen. "Look what Dad and I made. We're growing crystals." The exchange of photos and updates became a regular part of their routine. Sophie shared pictures of art projects and science experiments, Daniel sent photos of their weekend hiking adventures, and Amelia documented Lucas's developmental milestones and their explorations of New York City. But it was the longer phone conversations that became the cornerstone of Amelia's week. Usually on Sunday evenings after Lucas was asleep and Sophie had finished her homework, the 3 of them would talk for an hour or more. Sophie would share her latest discoveries and ask Amelia questions about everything from how skyscrapers stayed standing to why some people were homeless. "Amelia," Sophie said during one of these calls, "Dad says you're really important at your job. Do you get to make decisions that help people?" The question was so direct, so earnest, that Amelia found herself really thinking about her answer. "I do get to make some important decisions," she said carefully. "My company develops medicines that help people who are sick." "That's so cool, like you help create the medicines that help people get better." "Well, I help decide which medicines we should try to develop and how to get them to the people who need them." Sophie was quiet for a moment, processing this information with her characteristic seriousness. "So you could decide to make a medicine that helps kids who are sick, even if it might not make as much money as a medicine for grown-ups." The innocent question hit Amelia like a lightning bolt. Sophie had unknowingly identified one of the most challenging ethical dilemmas in pharmaceutical development: the tension between profit and social good, between shareholder value and human need. That's exactly the kind of decision I have to make sometimes," Amelia said slowly. "Well, that's easy then," Sophie said, with the confidence of someone who saw the world in clear moral terms. "You should always pick helping people over making extra money. Dad says money is nice to have, but helping people is what makes you feel good about yourself when you go to sleep at night." Daniel's voice came through the speaker, slightly embarrassed. "Sophie, you can't oversimplify complex business decisions like that." "But it's not really complex, is it?" Sophie asked. "Either you help people or you don't. The other stuff is just details." That night after the call ended, Amelia sat in her home office looking at financial projections for a pediatric cancer drug that her team had been developing. The numbers were challenging. Smaller market, higher development costs, significant regulatory hurdles. The rational business decision was to shelve the project and focus resources on more profitable ventures. But Sophie's words echoed in her mind: "You should always pick helping people over making extra money." The next morning, Amelia walked into the boardroom where the pediatric cancer drug's fate would be decided, and announced that they were moving forward with full development regardless of the financial projections. "The potential impact on patient outcomes outweighs the profit concerns," she told the surprised board members. "Sometimes doing the right thing is its own reward." The decision sparked debate, pushback from shareholders, and more than one heated discussion about fiduciary responsibility. But it also energized her research team, attracted positive media attention, and led to partnerships with children's hospitals across the country. "You've been different since that trip to LA," her CFO observed after a particularly intense board meeting. "More willing to take risks on projects with social impact." "Maybe I've just remembered why I got into this business in the first place," Amelia replied. The truth was more complex than that, but how could she explain that an 8-year-old's moral clarity had helped her rediscover her own values? As spring arrived in New York, Amelia found herself planning something she'd never done before: a real vacation. Not a working weekend or a business trip with some downtime, but actual time off with no agenda beyond spending time with the people who mattered most to her. "How would you and Sophie feel about visiting New York?" she asked Daniel during one of their Sunday calls. "I could show you the city, and Sophie could see some of the museums she's been reading about." The excitement in Sophie's voice was immediate and overwhelming. "Really? Could we see the Museum of Natural History and the Statue of Liberty and Central Park? Dad, can we please go?" Daniel's response was more measured, but equally warm. "Are you sure that's a big invitation? And New York hotels are expensive." "You'd stay with me, of course." Amelia said the words coming out before she'd fully thought them through. "I have plenty of space, and Lucas would love having Sophie around." The pause on the other end of the line was significant, and Amelia realized she might have overstepped. They were friends, good friends, but inviting them to stay in her home was a level of intimacy that went beyond their current relationship. "If that's too presumptuous," she said quickly, "I could book you a hotel nearby. I just thought—" "No," Daniel interrupted gently. "It's not presumptuous. It's incredibly generous. I just want to make sure you understand what you're offering. Sophie's excited about everything all the time, and she's not used to fancy places. She might break something or get too loud or—" "Daniel," Amelia said firmly, "I'm not inviting Sophie to a museum exhibit. I'm inviting my friends to my home. There's nothing she could break that matters more than having her there." The warmth in Daniel's voice when he responded told her everything she needed to know. "In that case, we'd love to come. When were you thinking?" They settled on the last weekend in April, which would give Sophie a chance to see the city when the weather was perfect and the trees in Central Park were in full bloom. Amelia threw herself into planning with an enthusiasm that surprised her assistant, her household staff, and herself. "Ms. Rhodes," her housekeeper Maria said, watching Amelia rearrange furniture in the guest room for the third time. "Are you nervous about something?" Amelia paused, holding a small vase she'd been considering moving. "I've never had house guests before. Not real ones anyway. Just business associates or work colleagues." Maria's expression softened. "These are friends, very good friends. A father and his 8-year-old daughter." "Ah," Maria said with understanding. "You want them to feel welcome. I want them to feel comfortable, happy, like they belong here." Maria smiled. "Then stop rearranging things and just be yourself. Good friends care about the person, not the perfect presentation." The advice was simple, but profound, and Amelia realized she'd been approaching the visit like a business meeting instead of a chance to spend time with people she cared about. When Friday afternoon arrived, Amelia found herself pacing her apartment like an expectant parent. She'd taken the afternoon off, something that had shocked her assistant into silence, and spent the time making sure everything was ready. Fresh flowers, Sophie's favorite snacks, researched and purchased a collection of art supplies in case she wanted to draw books about New York history and architecture. Lucas seemed to sense her excitement, babbling and reaching for everything as she carried him around the apartment for the 5th time. When the doorman's call came, announcing Daniel and Sophie's arrival, Amelia's heart jumped in a way that had nothing to do with nervousness and everything to do with anticipation. The elevator opened to reveal Sophie practically vibrating with excitement, her face pressed against the window as she stared at the city view. Daniel stood behind her with their simple luggage, looking slightly overwhelmed by the grandeur of the building's lobby. "Amelia," Sophie called out, launching herself forward for a hug that nearly knocked Lucas out of Amelia's arms. "We're here, we're really here." The elevator was so fast, and I could see the whole city from up there. Daniel's greeting was more subdued, but equally warm. "Thank you for this, he said quietly, accepting Amelia's one-armed hug while Lucas gurgled happily between them. "Sophie hasn't slept for 2 days. She's been so excited." "I haven't slept much either," Amelia admitted with a laugh. "I keep thinking of new things I want to show you." Sophie was already exploring the apartment with the fearless curiosity of childhood, exclaiming over the view from the floor-to-ceiling windows, the modern kitchen with its professional-grade appliances, and especially the art on the walls. "Is this a real painting?" she asked, standing before an abstract canvas that Amelia had purchased more for its investment value than its emotional appeal. "It is," Amelia confirmed. "Do you like it?" Sophie studied the painting with serious concentration. "It's pretty, but I don't know what it's supposed to be. Is that okay to say?" "It's completely okay to say," Amelia replied, realizing that she'd never really looked at the painting herself, yet ever considered whether it spoke to her beyond its monetary worth. "Art should make you feel something, and it's okay if what you feel is confusion." "I like my drawing better," Sophie announced with characteristic honesty. "The one I made of us on the airplane. It tells a story." Amelia looked at the expensive, abstract piece, then thought of Sophie's crayon drawing, hanging in her office. Vibrant, meaningful, created with love, rather than purchased for status. "You know what?" she said impulsively. "I like your drawing better too." The weekend that followed was unlike anything Amelia had ever experienced. Saturday morning brought pancakes in her pristine kitchen. Sophie helping measure ingredients, while Lucas watched from his high chair, Daniel telling stories about his own childhood breakfast traditions, while Amelia discovered the simple joy of cooking for people she cared about. The Museum of Natural History was everything Sophie had dreamed and more. She approached each exhibit with scientific curiosity and artistic appreciation, asking detailed questions about everything from dinosaur bone preservation to the physics of planetarium shows. Daniel and Amelia took turns answering her questions, comparing their different perspectives, and often learning from her unique observations. "Look how they positioned the T-Rex skeleton," Sophie said, standing before the massive fossil with her hands on her hips. "It's like they wanted it to look scary, but if you really look at the bone structure, you can see how it was designed for efficiency, not just hunting. Predators need to be smart, not just strong." Daniel looked at Amelia with a mixture of pride and amazement. "She gets this from her mother's side," he said quietly. Emma saw patterns everywhere, in art, in nature, in how people interacted with each other. "She gets it from your side too," Amelia observed, watching Sophie carefully examine the fossil's leg structure. "The curiosity, the willingness to question assumptions. That's learned behavior. Someone taught her that asking questions was valuable." The insight seemed to move Daniel deeply. As a single parent, he often worried about what Sophie was missing, without her mother's influence. But here was evidence that his own values and approach to the world were shaping her in positive ways. Sunday brought Central Park, where Sophie's delight in simple pleasures proved infectious. She fed ducks with the same enthusiasm she brought to museum exhibits, collected interesting rocks with the focus of a geological survey, and convinced both adults to join her on the playground equipment, despite their initial protests about age-appropriate behavior. When's the last time you went down a slide? Sophie asked Amelia, as they stood at the top of the elaborate climbing structure. I honestly can't remember, Amelia admitted. Then you definitely need to try it, Sophie declared. Racing makes it more fun. Riot. The experience of sliding down playground equipment while wearing designer jeans and a cashmere sweater should have felt ridiculous. Instead, it felt liberating. Lucas laughed and clapped from Daniel's arms as he watched the women in his life embrace their inner children. Again, Sophie called out, already climbing back up the structure. They spent 2 hours at the playground, and Amelia couldn't remember the last time she'd laughed so freely or felt so completely present in a moment. No thoughts of board meetings or acquisition strategies, no mental calculations of profit margins or market positioning. Just the simple pleasure of playing with a child who saw joy everywhere she looked. Sunday evening came too soon, bringing the reality that Daniel and Sophie's visit was ending. As they packed their things, Sophie carefully wrapping her new collection of New York souvenirs, while Daniel folded their clothes with practiced efficiency, Amelia felt an unexpected sadness settling over her. I don't want you to go. She found herself saying the words, coming out before she could stop them. Sophie looked up from her suitcase with surprise. Really, but you have important work to do. The work will always be there, Amelia said, realizing the truth of it as she spoke. But weekends like this, these are rare. Daniel paused in his packing, looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. We don't want to go either, he said quietly. This weekend has been special. Then don't, Amelia said impulsively. Stay another day. Sophie could see more of the city, and I could take tomorrow off. The suggestion hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that went beyond simple friendship. Sophie looked between the adults with the shrewd perception of a child who sensed undercurrents she didn't fully understand. We can't, Daniel said finally, though his tone suggested he wanted to. Sophie has school Tuesday, and I have a project deadline. Of course, Amelia said, quickly embarrassed by her impulsiveness. I wish we lived closer to each other. Me too, Sophie said with characteristic directness. Maybe we could visit more often. Or maybe you could come see us in Chicago sometime. The idea had never occurred to Amelia, but suddenly it seemed not just possible but necessary. I'd love that. Could I really? Our apartment's not fancy like this, Daniel warned. It's small and Sophie's art projects take up most of the living room, and the neighborhood's not exactly upscale. It sounds perfect, Amelia said, meaning it completely. As they waited for the car to take Daniel and Sophie to the airport, Lucas began to fuss, as if he too sensed that something wonderful was ending. Sophie immediately went to him, making faces and silly sounds until he started laughing again. He's going to miss you, Amelia observed. I'm going to miss him too, Sophie replied seriously. And you. This was the best weekend ever. The simple declaration brought tears to Amelia's eyes. In Sophie's world, the best weekend ever was a title earned through genuine joy and connection, not expensive experiences or impressive achievements. When the car arrived, the goodbye was harder than any of them had expected. Sophie hugged Amelia with fierce intensity, whispering, "Thank you for showing us your city and sharing Lucas with us." Daniel's hug lasted longer, conveying things that words couldn't express. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for all of it. For opening your home, for caring about Sophie, for being you." As Amelia watched their car disappear into the Manhattan traffic, she felt something she'd never experienced before. the specific kind of loneliness that comes from saying goodbye to people who have become essential to your happiness. That night, as she put Lucas to bed in an apartment that felt too quiet and too empty, Amelia realized that everything had changed again. The weekend hadn't just been a pleasant visit from friends. It had been a glimpse of what life could look like if she stopped building walls around her heart and started building bridges instead. Her phone buzzed with a text from Sophie. "Thank you for the best weekend ever. I drew you a picture of us in Central Park. Dad says he'll mail it tomorrow. Love, Sophie." The message was followed by one from Daniel. "Sophie's already planning your visit to Chicago. Fair warning. She's very excited about showing you her room and teaching you to make her famous grilled cheese sandwiches. Thank you again for everything." Amelia stared at the messages at the casual assumption that of course she would visit Chicago. Of course, this was the beginning of something rather than the end. In her world, people made polite promises about staying in touch that everyone knew they wouldn't keep. But Sophie and Daniel lived in a different world, one where friendship was a commitment rather than a convenience. Looking around her beautiful, empty apartment, Amelia made a decision that would have shocked her former self. She was going to learn to live in their world instead of expecting them to fit into hers. The first step would be booking a flight to Chicago. The flight to Chicago was booked within an hour of her decision, scheduled for the following Friday afternoon. Amelia had never made such an impulsive travel decision for purely personal reasons, and the spontaneity both thrilled and terrified her. She told her assistant to clear her calendar for the weekend, citing family obligations, a phrase that felt strange but somehow right when applied to Daniel and Sophie. "Family obligations," Jennifer repeated with barely concealed surprise. "Should I prepare any materials for meetings while you're away?" "No meetings," Amelia said firmly. "This is personal time." The concept was so foreign to her usual routine that Jennifer actually wrote it down, as if documenting a historic moment. When Amelia called to tell Daniel about her plans, Sophie's excited shriek in the background was audible even before Daniel handed over the phone. "You're really coming to see us?" Sophie's voice bubbled with joy. "For a whole weekend, Dad, she's really coming." "I'm really coming," Amelia confirmed, Lucas babbling happily in her lap, as if he too was excited about the adventure. "If you're sure you don't mind having house guests." "Mind?" Sophie's voice pitched higher with incredulity. "This is the best thing that's happened since you gave me the telescope. I already started planning everything we're going to do." "Oh. There's this amazing children's museum with a construction exhibit and a park where we can have picnics. And I want to teach you how to make Dad's famous grilled cheese and—" "Sophie," Daniel's voice interrupted gently. "Maybe let Amelia tell us what she'd like to do too." "Actually," Amelia said, surprising herself, "Sophie's plan sounds perfect. I've never learned to make grilled cheese sandwiches." The admission seemed to delight Sophie even more. "Really? But they're so easy and delicious. Dad taught me when I was 6, and now I make them better than he does." "That's debatable." Daniel's voice came through the speaker, warm with affection. As the week progressed, Amelia found herself approaching the Chicago trip with an anticipation that felt entirely different from her usual travel anxiety. Instead of dreading the disruption to her routine, she was excited about the break from it. Instead of packing efficiently for business purposes, she found herself choosing clothes based on comfort and practicality. Jeans for playing with Sophie, casual sweaters that would be appropriate for a children's museum, comfortable shoes for walking through neighborhoods instead of conference rooms. The transformation didn't go unnoticed at work. During a Thursday morning board meeting, Harold Peterson observed that she seemed unusually relaxed for someone facing a major acquisition deadline. "I've learned that perspective is important," Amelia replied. Sometimes stepping away from work helps you see it more clearly when you return. The comment sparked a broader discussion about work-life balance, with several board members admitting they rarely took time off that wasn't somehow connected to business. Amelia listened to their complaints about exhaustion and stress with new understanding. She'd been living that way for years, mistaking busyness for productivity, isolation for focus. Maybe we should all follow Amelia's example, Harold suggested. When's the last time any of us took a real vacation? The question hung in the air, unanswered but profound. These were some of the most successful people in their industries, yet none of them could remember their last genuine break from work. Friday afternoon found Amelia at LaGuardia with Lucas waiting to board a flight that represented something entirely new. Travel for the sole purpose of being with people she loved. As they settled into their seats, she realized that Lucas was now a seasoned traveler at barely 8 months old, having crossed the country multiple times in his short life. "We're going to see Sophie and Daniel," she told him, as the plane taxied toward takeoff. "You remember Sophie, don't you? She's the one who taught you about sea anemones." Lucas responded with a string of babbled syllables that sounded almost conversational, and Amelia chose to interpret it as enthusiasm for their adventure. The flight was smooth and uneventful, giving Amelia time to think about how dramatically her life had changed since that turbulent flight to Los Angeles. The woman who had boarded that plane in crisis, overwhelmed by motherhood and isolated by success, felt like a different person entirely. She was still a CEO, still driven and ambitious, but those aspects of her identity no longer consumed everything else. O'Hare Airport was bustling with Friday evening travelers, but Amelia navigated the crowds with Lucas strapped securely to her chest in a carrier, another piece of equipment she'd never imagined owning 6 months ago. The domestic normalcy of traveling with a baby, complete with diaper bag and extra bottles, felt like a role she was still learning to play. Daniel and Sophie were waiting at baggage claim. Sophie bouncing on her toes with barely contained excitement, while Daniel held a hand-drawn sign that read, "Welcome to Chicago, Amelia and Lucas," in Sophie's careful block letters decorated with colorful stars and planets. "You made it," Sophie called out, running toward them, with the fearless joy of a child who had never learned to be self-conscious about public displays of affection. Amelia found herself enveloped in Sophie's enthusiastic hug, while Lucas gurgled happily from his carrier, clearly recognizing voices he'd been hearing regularly for months. "How was the flight?" Daniel asked, accepting Amelia's one-armed hug with the easy familiarity their friendship had developed. "Perfect," Amelia said, meaning it. "Lucas was an angel, and I actually read a book for pleasure instead of working the whole time." Sophie's eyes widened. "You read a storybook on the airplane?" "Well, it was a novel, not a picture book," Amelia explained. "But yes, I read for fun instead of for work." "That's so cool," Sophie declared. "What was it about?" As they walked toward Daniel's modest sedan, Amelia found herself describing the novel. A story about a woman who inherits a bookstore and discovers letters hidden in the walls, while Sophie listened with the intense focus she brought to everything that interested her. "That sounds like a mystery and a love story at the same time," Sophie observed as Daniel loaded their luggage into the trunk. "I suppose it is," Amelia agreed, settling into the passenger seat, while Daniel secured Lucas's car seat in the back beside Sophie. The drive through Chicago's neighborhoods was a revelation. Instead of the downtown hotels and conference centers that had defined Amelia's previous business visits, they traveled through residential areas with tree-lined streets, corner grocery stores, and small parks where children played on swing sets. Daniel pointed out local landmarks with the pride of someone who had chosen his community deliberately rather than simply accepting it as convenient. "That's Sophie's school," he said, indicating a brick building with colorful playground equipment visible behind a chain-link fence. And that's where we buy groceries. And there's the library, where Sophie spends most of her free time. The children's librarian knows me by name, Sophie added proudly. Mrs. Rodriguez always saves the new science books for me to see first. The ordinariness of it all struck Amelia powerfully. This was what normal life looked like. Routines built around community connections, familiar faces at neighborhood establishments, the comfortable rhythm of belonging somewhere. Daniel's apartment building was a 3-story brick structure that had probably been built in the 1950s, surrounded by similar buildings that spoke of working families and modest prosperity. As they climbed to the second floor, Sophie chattered about the neighbors they might encounter. Mrs. Chen lives across the hall, and she's the one who taught me about science when Dad was working late. And Mr. and Mrs. Martinez have twin babies who are super cute but really loud sometimes. Oh, and there's this teenager named Marcus who plays guitar, but Dad says we can't complain because he's actually pretty good. The apartment itself was small, but warm, filled with evidence of a life actively lived rather than carefully curated. Sophie's artwork covered the refrigerator and much of the living room walls. Science projects occupied most of the dining table, and comfortable furniture showed the wear of daily use. "It's not much," Daniel said suddenly, seeming self-conscious about the difference between his modest home and Amelia's Manhattan penthouse. "It's perfect," Amelia said sincerely, looking around at the photos documenting Sophie's growth. The bookshelves packed with everything from children's literature to engineering textbooks, the cozy chaos of a home where people actually lived. "It feels like a family lives here." Sophie beamed at the compliment. "Want to see my room? I cleaned it special for your visit." Sophie's bedroom was a testament to an 8-year-old's diverse interests. Star charts shared wall space with her own drawings. A small telescope sat positioned by the window, and a collection of rocks and fossils occupied a special display shelf. Her bed was covered with a quilt that had clearly been handmade, probably by a grandmother or other relative who wanted to contribute something lasting to this child's life. "This is where I do my stargazing," Sophie explained, patting the telescope Amelia had given her. "I've seen Venus and Mars and the moon's craters. Dad says when I get older we might be able to take a trip somewhere with really dark skies so I can see more." "Where would you want to go?" Amelia asked, settling carefully on Sophie's desk chair, while Lucas looked around with interest from his carrier. "There's this place in Arizona called Kitt Peak," Sophie said seriously. "It has huge telescopes that scientists use to study space, but it's really expensive to travel there, so we're saving up." The casual mention of saving money for a special trip reminded Amelia of the economic realities that shaped Daniel and Sophie's choices. They couldn't simply decide to travel somewhere and book tickets without consideration of cost. Every adventure required planning, saving, and careful budgeting. "Maybe we could plan a trip there together sometime," Amelia suggested impulsively. "I'd love to see what the stars look like through a real observatory telescope." Sophie's face lit up with excitement, but Daniel appeared in the doorway with the expression of gentle concern. "That's incredibly generous," he said carefully, "but we can't accept expensive trips from you. It wouldn't be appropriate." Amelia felt heat rise in her cheeks as she realized how her offer might sound. Like charity, like the wealthy woman trying to buy her way into their lives with experiences they couldn't afford on their own. "I didn't mean—" she started, then stopped. "You're right. I'm sorry. I wasn't thinking about how that would sound." Sophie looked between the adults with the perceptive awareness of a child who had learned to read adult tensions carefully. "Could we maybe save up for it together?" she suggested diplomatically. "Like if we all put some money aside, it wouldn't be one person paying for everything." The wisdom in Sophie's solution struck both adults simultaneously. She had found a way to preserve everyone's dignity while still keeping the dream alive. "That's a brilliant idea," Amelia said. "We could start a Star Trip fund and all contribute what we can." Daniel's expression relaxed into a smile. "Leave it to Sophie to solve the problem the grown-ups couldn't figure out." "Speaking of solutions," Sophie said, clearly eager to move past the awkward moment, "are you ready to learn how to make the world's best grilled cheese sandwiches?" The kitchen lesson that followed was unlike any cooking experience Amelia had ever had. Sophie approached grilled cheese construction with the same methodical precision she brought to science experiments, explaining the importance of butter temperature, bread thickness, and cheese distribution with the confidence of an expert. "The secret is to use medium heat," Sophie instructed, as Amelia stood at the stove with a spatula, feeling more nervous than she had during her last board presentation. "Too hot, and the outside burns before the cheese melts. Too cool, and it gets soggy instead of crispy." Daniel watched from the kitchen table, bouncing Lucas on his knee, while providing encouraging commentary. "Sophie's actually a better cook than I am," he admitted. "She has more patience for getting the details right." "That's because cooking is like science," Sophie explained seriously. "You have to follow the process exactly if you want good results." When Amelia's first attempt emerged from the pan, golden brown and perfectly melted, Sophie cheered as if she'd accomplished something genuinely significant. "Perfect," Sophie declared. "Now you know how to make comfort food." They ate dinner sitting around Daniel's small kitchen table, Sophie chattering about her week at school while Lucas sat contentedly in a borrowed high chair, fascinated by the different environment and new faces to study. "Mrs. Anderson, that's my teacher, said we're going to start learning about the solar system next week," Sophie reported between bites of her grilled cheese. "I told her I already know about planets, because my friend Amelia taught me, and she said maybe I could share what I've learned with the class." The casual reference to being Sophie's friend, spoken with such matter-of-fact affection, made Amelia's chest tighten with emotion. In her world, friendships were often strategic alliances or networking opportunities, but Sophie's friendship was pure and uncomplicated. She simply liked Amelia and wanted to include her in her life. "What are you going to tell them about planets?" Amelia asked. "Well, I thought I'd start with how scientists discover exoplanets. You know, planets that orbit other stars," Sophie said, launching into an explanation that demonstrated both her genuine understanding of complex concepts and her gift for making them accessible to others. As the evening progressed, Amelia found herself settling into the rhythm of family life in a way she'd never experienced. After dinner, they watched a nature documentary about marine life, while Lucas played on a blanket spread across the living room floor. Sophie provided running commentary about the different species, clearly drawing from extensive previous research. "Did you know that octopuses have 3 hearts?" she asked during a segment about cephalopods. "I did not know that," Amelia replied honestly. "Why do they need 3 hearts? Because they have blue blood instead of red, and blue blood doesn't carry oxygen as well, so they need extra pumps to keep it moving efficiently," Sophie explained with the enthusiasm of someone sharing fascinating knowledge rather than showing off her intelligence. Daniel caught Amelia's eye and smiled. "She's been obsessed with marine biology since we went to the aquarium last month," he explained. "Before that, it was astronomy, and before that, it was paleontology." "I like learning about everything," Sophie said seriously. "Dad says curiosity is the most important thing you can have because it means you never get bored." As they prepared for bed, Amelia realized that she'd never felt less bored in her life. Every moment with Sophie and Daniel felt rich with discovery, Whether they were discussing octopus anatomy or debating the best cheese for grilled sandwiches, Daniel had given up his bedroom for Amelia and Lucas, insisting on taking the living room couch despite Amelia's protests. As she settled Lucas into the portable crib they'd borrowed from a neighbor, she looked around the simple room and felt a contentment she'd never experienced in her luxury Manhattan bedroom. Saturday morning brought the sound of Sophie's laughter from the kitchen, where she was apparently teaching Daniel something about pancake flipping technique. Amelia lay in bed for a moment, listening to the domestic sounds of a family starting their day, and realized she was experiencing something she'd never thought to want. The feeling of belonging somewhere that had nothing to do with achievement or status. "Good morning, sleepyheads," Sophie called when Amelia emerged with Lucas in her arms. "We made pancakes and I only dropped one on the floor." The day that followed was filled with the kind of simple pleasures that Amelia was learning to value above expensive experiences. The children's museum Sophie had promised turned out to be a wonderland of hands-on exhibits that engaged her curiosity as much as they did Sophie's. They built structures in the construction zone, conducted simple chemistry experiments, and explored a replica archaeological dig where Sophie carefully explained proper excavation techniques. "The key is patience," Sophie instructed as Amelia carefully brushed dirt away from a buried artifact. Real archaeologists spend years uncovering sites because they don't want to damage anything important. "How do you know so much about archaeology?" Amelia asked, impressed by Sophie's detailed knowledge. "I read a lot," Sophie said simply, "and I asked Mrs. Rodriguez at the library to help me find books about things I want to learn about." The afternoon brought a visit to the neighborhood park, where Sophie demonstrated her playground expertise, while Daniel and Amelia sat on a bench watching Lucas discover the fascination of grass and leaves. Other families occupied nearby benches and playground equipment, creating an atmosphere of community that felt foreign yet wonderful to Amelia. "This is nice," she said, watching Sophie help a younger child navigate the climbing structure with patient kindness. "She's always been good with little kids," Daniel observed. "I think it comes from missing having siblings. She likes being the helpful big sister to other people's children." The comment sparked a conversation about family structures and childhood experiences that revealed new layers of understanding between them. Daniel talked about growing up in a large, chaotic family, where everyone looked out for each other, while Amelia described her solitary childhood among adults who valued achievement over affection. "I always wondered what it would be like to have brothers and sisters," Amelia admitted. "It's loud and messy and sometimes frustrating," Daniel said with a smile. "But it's also wonderful. You always know someone has your back, and you learn early that the world doesn't revolve around you." "Sophie seems to have learned that lesson anyway," Amelia observed, watching the girl patiently teaching another child how to cross the monkey bars. "That's Emma's influence," Daniel said softly. "Even though Sophie barely remembers her mother consciously, Emma's values are part of who she is. The kindness, the curiosity, the way she sees good in everyone, that all comes from Emma." They spent the evening cooking dinner together, a collaborative effort that resulted in spaghetti with meat sauce and a salad that Sophie insisted on preparing herself. As they sat around the kitchen table sharing the meal they'd created together, Amelia felt a profound sense of rightness that she'd never experienced before. "This is the best dinner I've ever had," she announced, meaning it completely. Sophie giggled. "It's just spaghetti." "Sometimes the simplest things are the best things," Amelia replied, realizing she was quoting something Daniel had said during one of their phone conversations. After dinner, they worked together on a jigsaw puzzle, a complex image of the solar system that challenged all of them while providing opportunities for conversation and gentle competition. Lucas sat in his bouncy seat, fascinated by the colorful pieces and the animated discussions about planetary positioning. "Jupiter should go here," Sophie said carefully, placing a piece that depicted the giant planet's distinctive bands. "Are you sure?" Daniel asked, examining the surrounding pieces. "The colors don't quite match." "Trust me," Sophie said confidently. "I know Jupiter when I see it." She was right, of course, and the piece fit perfectly. As the evening progressed and the puzzle took shape, Amelia found herself marveling at the simple pleasure of working toward a common goal with no pressure, no deadline, no strategic importance beyond the satisfaction of completion. Sunday arrived with a gentle melancholy, the knowledge that this perfect weekend was drawing to a close. Sophie seemed determined to pack as much activity as possible into their remaining time together, proposing a visit to the library, a walk through the neighborhood, to see Daniel's favorite coffee shop, and a final playground adventure. At the library, Mrs. Rodriguez greeted Sophie with the warmth of someone who genuinely cared about the child's intellectual development. "Sophie tells me you're a scientist," Mrs. Rodriguez said to Amelia. "She's very excited about having a friend who understands her questions about how medicines work." "I'm not exactly a scientist," Amelia clarified. "I run a company that develops medicines, but Sophie probably knows more about actual science than I do." Mrs. Rodriguez smiled knowingly. "Sophie has that effect on people. She makes everyone around her want to learn more." They spent an hour browsing the children's section, with Sophie selecting books for her upcoming school project, while recommending titles she thought Lucas might enjoy when he was older. Her selections revealed her thoughtful consideration of other people's interests and needs. "This one has really good pictures of animals," she told Amelia, showing her a board book about farm animals. "And the words are simple but not babyish. Lucas will like the colors." The coffee shop visit revealed another aspect of Daniel and Sophie's community connections. The barista knew their usual orders and asked about Sophie's latest school projects with genuine interest. Other customers smiled and waved, clearly familiar with the father-daughter duo who brightened the neighborhood with their presence. "This is what community looks like," Amelia thought, as she watched Sophie share her excitement about the weekend with anyone who would listen. "This is what I've been missing." As Sunday evening approached, and they returned to the apartment to pack Amelia's things, the reality of departure began to settle over all of them. Sophie's usual chatter became more subdued, and Lucas seemed to sense the change in atmosphere, becoming fussier than he'd been all weekend. "I don't want you to go," Sophie said quietly, as Amelia folded clothes back into her suitcase. "I don't want to go either," Amelia admitted. "This has been one of the best weekends of my life." Sophie perked up slightly. "Really? Even better than fancy business trips and important meetings?" "Especially better than those things," Amelia said firmly. "Those things are just work. This weekend has been real life." The distinction seemed to resonate with Sophie, who nodded with understanding beyond her years. "Dad says the best parts of life are the parts that aren't about making money or being important." As they prepared to leave for the airport, Daniel pulled Amelia aside while Sophie was gathering her latest drawings to send back to New York. "I need to tell you something," he said quietly. "This weekend, it's shown me things I didn't know I was missing. Having you here, seeing Sophie light up the way she does around you, feeling like we're part of something bigger than just the two of us." His words hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that neither of them was quite ready to address directly. "I've felt it too," Amelia said softly. "Like this is what family is supposed to feel like." "The thing is," Daniel continued, "I don't know how to navigate this. The distance, the different worlds we live in, the fact that we're both responsible for children who need stability. We don't have to figure it all out right now, Amelia interrupted gently. We just have to keep caring about each other and see where that leads. Daniel's smile was grateful and warm. When did you become so wise about relationships? I learned from an 8-year-old who sees everything clearly, Amelia replied. And from her father who taught me that the most important things can't be planned or strategized. They just have to be felt. The ride to the airport was quieter than their previous journeys together, all of them lost in thoughts about what the weekend had meant and what came next. Sophie sat between Daniel and Amelia in the back seat, holding Lucas's hand while he dozed in his car seat. At the departure gate, their goodbye was more emotional than any of them had expected. Sophie clung to Amelia with fierce intensity, whispering promises to call every day and draw pictures of everything interesting that happened at school. Daniel's embrace lasted longer, conveying feelings that words couldn't adequately express. Thank you, he said quietly, for seeing us, for caring about us, for being willing to step outside your comfort zone to be part of our lives. Thank you for letting me, Amelia replied, for showing me what I was missing, for teaching me that success without connection is just expensive loneliness. As her flight taxied away from Chicago, Amelia looked down at the city lights and realized that she was leaving part of herself behind. The woman who had arrived on Friday was not the same person who was returning to New York on Sunday night. Somewhere in between grilled cheese lessons and playground adventures, museum visits and library browsing, she had discovered who she was when she wasn't trying to prove anything to anyone. The realization was both exhilarating and terrifying. How could she maintain this new sense of self while returning to the demanding world of corporate leadership? How could she balance her professional responsibilities with her growing understanding of what truly mattered in life? Her phone buzzed with a text from Sophie. Thank you for the best weekend ever again. I put the Star Trip fun jar on my dresser and already added my allowance from this week. Love you. The casual love you at the end of the message brought tears to Amelia's eyes. When was the last time someone had said they loved her without wanting something in return? When was the last time she had felt worthy of uncomplicated affection? As the plane climbed toward cruising altitude, carrying her back to Manhattan and the life she'd built through years of focused ambition, Amelia held Lucas close and made a silent promise. She would find a way to honor both parts of herself, the successful CEO and the woman who had discovered the joy of belonging to something larger than her own achievements. The challenge would be learning to live authentically in both worlds without losing the essential truth she'd discovered in Chicago, that love in all its forms was the only success that truly mattered. The weeks following her return from Chicago brought a restlessness to Amelia's life that no amount of corporate success could satisfy. The pediatric cancer drug she'd championed had received FDA approval, generating headlines about breakthrough treatments and compassionate leadership. Board meetings ran smoothly, acquisition deals closed ahead of schedule, and her company's stock reached an all-time high. Yet every achievement felt hollow compared to the memory of Sophie's laughter echoing through Daniel's small apartment, or the simple satisfaction of successfully flipping a grilled cheese sandwich while Lucas babbled encouragement from his high chair. You seem distracted lately, Harold Peterson observed during a quarterly review meeting. Everything all right? The board's noticed you're different. Amelia looked around the mahogany conference table at faces she'd known for years. Successful people who wielded enormous influence yet seemed as trapped by their success as she had once been. I've been thinking about what we're building here, she said carefully. Whether the life this success creates is actually worth living. The comment sparked uncomfortable silence. These weren't people accustomed to questioning the fundamental assumptions that governed their world. Success is its own reward, Veronica Walsh said finally. The alternative is mediocrity. But what if there's a third option? Amelia asked. What if success could actually enhance life instead of replacing it? The philosophical discussion that followed revealed how isolated they'd all become in their pursuit of professional achievement. None of them could remember their last genuine vacation, their last conversation with a friend who wasn't also a business contact, their last moment of pure joy that wasn't connected to a deal closing or a competitor failing. That evening, Amelia sat in her pristine apartment with Lucas, who was now crawling enthusiastically and investigating every corner with fearless curiosity. The space that had once represented the pinnacle of sophisticated living now felt sterile and unwelcoming compared to the lived-in warmth of Daniel's home. Her phone rang with the familiar rhythm of Sophie's evening calls, and Amelia felt the day's tension drain away as she answered. Amelia, guess what happened at school today? Sophie's voice bubbled with excitement. Mrs. Anderson let me teach the whole class about exoplanets, and Tommy Martinez said it was the coolest presentation ever. That's wonderful, sweetheart. Did you use the information we talked about during your visit? Yes. And I told them about how you help make medicines that save people's lives, and how that's like being a scientist, but also helping people at the same time. The innocent connection Sophie made between scientific discovery and human compassion struck Amelia powerfully. This child consistently saw the threads that connected individual actions to larger purposes, the way personal choices rippled outward to affect entire communities. Can I talk to your dad for a minute? Amelia asked. Dad? Amelia wants to talk to you, Sophie called, and Amelia heard the phone being passed along. How are you holding up? Daniel's voice carried the warmth that had become essential to her well-being. I'm struggling, Amelia admitted. Coming back here after Chicago, it's like trying to fit into clothes that don't fit anymore. Everything feels wrong. Daniel was quiet for a moment, understanding the weight of what she was saying. What specifically feels wrong? The isolation. The assumption that work should consume everything else. The way success is measured only in financial terms. She paused, watching Lucas examine a colorful block with scientific intensity. I keep thinking about how different life could be. Different how? What if I didn't have to choose between professional success and personal happiness? What if I could build something that honored both? The question had been forming in her mind for weeks, growing stronger with each conversation they shared, each moment she spent feeling displaced in her own life. That sounds like more than just a philosophical question, Daniel observed gently. It is. Daniel, I need to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. Okay. Amelia took a deep breath, knowing that what she was about to say would change everything between them one way or another. How would you and Sophie feel about moving to New York? The silence that followed stretched long enough for Amelia to wonder if the call had dropped. When Daniel finally spoke, his voice was carefully measured. That's a big question. Are you talking about temporarily or? I'm talking about permanently. I'm talking about us building a life together as a family. The words hung in the air between them, carrying the weight of months of growing connection, deepening affection, and the recognition that what they'd found together was too precious to sacrifice to geographical distance. Amelia, Daniel said softly, are you saying what I think you're saying? I'm saying I love you, both of you. I'm saying that Lucas lights up when he hears Sophie's voice, and that I've never felt more myself than when I'm in your kitchen learning to make grilled cheese. I'm saying that success without you feels like failure, and that I want to build something beautiful together. She heard Daniel's sharp intake of breath, then Sophie's voice in the background asking what was happening. "Can I put you on speaker?" Daniel asked. "Sophie should hear this too." "Dad, what's going on?" Sophie's voice came through clearly as Daniel switched the call. "Sophie," Amelia said, her heart pounding with the magnitude of what she was proposing, "how would you feel about moving to New York to live with Lucas and me?" Sophie's gasp was audible even through the phone. "Really? Like permanently? We'd all live together like a real family." "Like a real family," Amelia confirmed. "If that's what you want. If that's what you all want." "Yes," Sophie shouted without hesitation. "Yes, yes, yes. Dad, can we please?" Daniel's voice when it came was thick with emotion. "Sophie, this is a huge decision. We'd be leaving everything we know here, your school, your friends, Mrs. Chen, our whole life. But we'd be gaining everything too," Sophie said with the clarity that consistently amazed the adults in her life. "We'd have Amelia and Lucas every day instead of just on visits. And New York has amazing museums and libraries and schools. And Dad, you could get a job anywhere because you're really smart." The confidence in her father's abilities, spoken with such matter-of-fact certainty, moved both adults deeply. "Sophie," Amelia said carefully, "this would mean big changes for all of us. I travel a lot for work and my schedule can be demanding. It wouldn't always be easy." "Nothing important is easy," Sophie replied with 8-year-old wisdom. "But that doesn't mean it's not worth doing." Daniel's laugh carried both joy and amazement. "When did our daughter become the wisest person in the family?" "I learned from watching you and Amelia figure out how to love each other," Sophie said simply. "You both teach me that caring about people is more important than being comfortable." The conversation that followed lasted 2 hours, covering practical concerns and emotional realities with equal weight. Daniel worried about finding work in New York's competitive engineering market. Sophie wanted to know if she could bring her telescope and her rock collection. Amelia assured them that her apartment could become their apartment, that her resources could smooth the transition, that her life had enough space for all the chaos and joy they would bring. "I need to ask you something difficult," Daniel said toward the end of the call. "Are you sure this isn't just about wanting to rescue us, about feeling guilty for having so much when we have so little?" The question cut to the heart of Amelia's fears about her own motivations. Was this generous love or patronizing charity? Was she offering partnership or attempting to purchase the family she'd never had? "I've thought about that," she said honestly. "And I know it might look that way from the outside. But Daniel, you've given me more than I could ever give you. You've shown me what it means to be present, to prioritize people over achievements, to find joy in simple moments. Sophie has taught me that curiosity and kindness matter more than success. Lucas is happier and calmer when you're around, because you know how to be a father in ways I'm still learning to be a mother." She paused, gathering her thoughts to express something that felt too large for words. "This isn't about me saving you. This is about us saving each other." The truth of that statement resonated through the phone connection, carrying the weight of months of mutual discovery and growing dependence on each other's presence in their lives. "Okay," Daniel said finally. "Okay, let's do this. Let's build a family together." Sophie's cheer was so loud that Amelia had to hold the phone away from her ear, and even Lucas, who had been playing quietly nearby, looked up with interest at the joyful noise. The next 6 weeks passed in a whirlwind of logistics and life changes that would have overwhelmed Amelia just a year earlier. But now, with clear purpose, driving every decision, she found herself energized, rather than exhausted by the complexity of merging two lives into one. Daniel's job search proved easier than expected when Amelia discovered that her company's engineering division needed someone with his exact qualifications for a new medical device project. The interview process was rigorous and entirely merit-based. Amelia insisted on staying completely removed from the hiring decision, but Daniel's expertise and collaborative approach made him an obvious choice. "I got the job," he called to tell her 3 weeks after applying. "They want me to start in a month, which gives us time to finish everything up here." Sophie's transition required more delicate handling. Leaving her school, her friends, and especially Mrs. Chen proved emotionally challenging for a child who formed deep attachments to the people and places in her life. "I'm going to miss you so much," Mrs. Chen said during their farewell visit, holding Sophie's hands while tears ran down both their faces. "But I'm so excited for your new adventure. You'll learn so much in New York, and you'll make new friends who appreciate how special you are." "Can I still call you sometimes?" Sophie asked. "To tell you about things I learn and ask questions when I get confused." "You better call me," Mrs. Chen said firmly. "I want to hear about every museum visit and every new book you discover." The moving process revealed how differently Daniel and Sophie approached major life changes compared to Amelia's usual method of hiring professionals to handle everything efficiently. They packed their own belongings, said personal goodbyes to neighbors and local shopkeepers, and took photographs of places that held special meaning to preserve memories of their Chicago life. "We're not trying to forget where we came from," Daniel explained as they walked through their empty apartment one final time. "We're carrying it with us." The approach reminded Amelia that their move to New York wasn't an ending, but a continuation, a way of honoring their past while building toward their future. On the last Saturday in October, Daniel and Sophie arrived at JFK Airport with 6 suitcases, 2 boxes of books, and Sophie's carefully wrapped telescope. Amelia met them at baggage claim with Lucas in his stroller, and a heart so full of anticipation that she could barely contain her excitement. "Welcome home," she said, as Sophie launched herself into her arms with characteristic enthusiasm. "We're really here," Sophie exclaimed, looking around the bustling airport with wide eyes. "We're really going to live in New York." The drive into Manhattan gave Sophie her first real look at the city that would become her home. She pressed her face to the taxi window, commenting on everything from the density of the buildings to the diversity of the people walking the sidewalks. "There are so many different kinds of people," she observed with delight. "And look at all those taxis, Dad. This is going to be such an adventure." When they reached Amelia's building, Sophie was appropriately impressed by the doorman and the marble lobby, but her real excitement came when they entered the apartment and she saw how Amelia had prepared for their arrival. The sterile perfection of Amelia's former living space had been transformed into something that looked like a home where children actually lived. Sophie's artwork from Chicago decorated the refrigerator, comfortable furniture had replaced some of the more formal pieces, and a play area near the windows provided space for Lucas to explore safely. "You made it look like a family lives here," Sophie said with wonder, examining the way her drawings had been carefully framed and hung in the hallway. "A family does live here now," Amelia replied. "This is your home." Daniel's room, the former guest room that Amelia had converted into a master bedroom, was furnished simply but thoughtfully, with space for his engineering books and a comfortable chair positioned to take advantage of the city view. But it was Sophie's new bedroom that revealed the depth of Amelia's commitment to making them feel truly welcome. The room had been designed around Sophie's interests and personality. Star charts on the ceiling, built-in shelves for her rock collection, a desk positioned by the window for optimal telescope use, and walls painted in deep blue with tiny points of light that would glow like stars when the lights were turned off. "It's perfect," Sophie whispered, tears running down her cheeks as she explored every detail. "It's the most beautiful room I've ever seen." "The best part," Amelia said, leading Sophie to the window, "is that you can see the Museum of Natural History from here. We can walk there whenever you want." Sophie's hug nearly knocked Amelia over with its intensity. "Thank you for making us part of your family," she said, with the emotional directness that had become so precious to all of them. "Thank you for making me part of yours," Amelia replied, meaning it completely. The first weeks of their new life together brought adjustments that tested everyone's patience and flexibility. Sophie needed time to adapt to a new school, new teachers, and the overwhelming sensory experience of living in Manhattan. Daniel struggled with the transition from Chicago's relaxed pace to New York's relentless energy. Amelia discovered that managing a household with children required completely different skills than running a pharmaceutical company. But gradually, they found their rhythm. Morning routines that got everyone fed, dressed, and out the door on time. Evening rituals that brought them back together to share the day's experiences. Weekend adventures that took advantage of New York's incredible cultural resources while honoring their need for quiet family time. "I love my new school," Sophie announced one evening as they sat around the dinner table sharing highlights from their day. "My teacher, Ms. Patricia, says I can do an independent study project on exoplanets, and there's this girl named Maria who knows everything about marine biology." "That sounds wonderful," Daniel said, serving himself more of the pasta they'd cooked together. "Are you making friends easily?" "Yeah, Maria and I are going to be science partners, and there's this boy named David who's really good at math and wants to be an engineer like you, Dad." The easy way Sophie had adapted to her new environment while maintaining her essential curiosity and kindness demonstrated the resilience that both Daniel and Emma had nurtured in her. "What about you?" Amelia asked Daniel. "How's the new job going?" "It's challenging in the best possible way," Daniel replied. "The team is brilliant, and the project we're working on could revolutionize cardiac monitoring for premature infants. It feels good to be building something that could save lives." The medical focus of his new work had created unexpected opportunities for Daniel and Amelia to collaborate professionally as well as personally. Their different perspectives, her understanding of regulatory processes and market dynamics, his engineering expertise and practical problem-solving skills, proved complementary in ways that strengthened both their relationship and their professional effectiveness. "Are you happy, Dad?" Sophie asked with the direct concern of a child who had learned to monitor her parents' emotional well-being. Daniel reached across the table to take Amelia's hand, a gesture that had become natural over their weeks of building a life together. "I'm happier than I ever thought I could be again," he said simply. "We all are, aren't we?" Lucas, who was becoming increasingly vocal and interactive, chose that moment to bang his spoon against his high chair tray and babble something that sounded remarkably like agreement. "I think that's a yes," Sophie giggled. As autumn deepened into winter, their family routine solidified around shared commitments and individual growth. Sophie thrived in her new school, developing friendships and pursuing independent projects that challenged her academically while nurturing her natural curiosity. Daniel's work at Amelia's company progressed from successful collaboration to genuine innovation as his engineering insights helped accelerate development of several promising medical devices. Amelia discovered that having a family didn't diminish her professional effectiveness. It enhanced it by providing emotional stability and broader perspective that made her a more thoughtful leader and strategic thinker. "You've changed," Harold Peterson observed during a board meeting in December. "Not just since Chicago, but since you started your family." You seem settled, confident in a way that goes beyond professional competence. The comment sparked broader discussion about work-life integration among the board members, several of whom had begun questioning their own sacrifices of personal fulfillment for professional achievement. Maybe we've been approaching success backwards, Amelia suggested. Maybe the goal should be building a life that supports both professional achievement and personal happiness instead of assuming we have to choose between them. The philosophy she articulated had emerged from months of living it, of discovering that love and ambition could coexist and strengthen each other, rather than compete for dominance. On a snowy Saturday in late December, as they decorated a Christmas tree that Sophie had insisted on choosing personally from a lot on the Upper West Side, Amelia realized how completely her definition of success had evolved. "This is our first Christmas as a real family," Sophie announced carefully, placing a handmade ornament on a prominent branch. "Next year, we'll have more ornaments because we'll have more memories." The observation carried typical Sophie wisdom, that families weren't built through grand gestures, but through the accumulation of shared experiences, small traditions, and daily choices to prioritize each other's well-being. "What are you thinking about?" Daniel asked, noticing Amelia's contemplative expression as she watched Sophie direct Lucas's ornament placement with gentle patience. "I'm thinking about that flight," Amelia said softly. "How desperate I felt, how alone, how certain I was failing at everything that mattered. And now I know that everything had to break down so we could build something better together." That evening, after Sophie had fallen asleep, surrounded by her new books, and Lucas was settled in his crib, Daniel and Amelia sat by their Christmas tree, talking about the future they were creating together. "I have something to tell you," Amelia said, her voice carrying a mixture of excitement and nervousness that made Daniel look at her with concern. "What is it?" "I've been offered a position heading up a new initiative, developing affordable medications for underserved populations. It would mean less travel, more focus on humanitarian impact, and the opportunity to build something that prioritizes people over profit margins." Daniel's smile was immediate and brilliant. "That sounds perfect for you. Are you going to take it?" "Only if you think we can make it work as a family. The salary is lower and the work might be more emotionally demanding." "Amelia," Daniel said, taking her hands in his, "money was never what made you remarkable. Your compassion, your intelligence, your willingness to fight for what matters. That's what makes you extraordinary. If this position lets you use those qualities more fully, then of course we can make it work." The conversation that followed covered practical concerns and larger dreams with equal attention to detail. They talked about Sophie's education, Lucas's development, their shared commitment to building a life that honored both individual growth and collective well-being. As they prepared for bed, Amelia realized that the woman who had once measured success solely through corporate achievements now understood that the greatest accomplishment was creating a loving home where everyone could flourish. "One more thing," Daniel said as they turned off the lights. "Sophie has a request." "What kind of request?" "She wants to know if she can start calling you Mom." The question stopped Amelia in her tracks, bringing tears to her eyes and a tightness to her throat that made speaking impossible for several moments. "She said she knows you're not her biological mother, but that you love her like a real mom does, and that family is about who chooses to love you, not just who you're related to by blood." "What did you tell her?" "I told her that was between you and her, but that I thought you'd be honored." Amelia thought about Emma, Sophie's biological mother, who had loved her daughter completely during her brief life and felt overwhelming gratitude rather than competition. Emma's love had created the foundation that allowed Sophie to trust deeply and connect authentically with new people. I would be honored, Amelia said finally, more honored than by any achievement in my professional life. The next morning brought Sophie's tentative question at breakfast. Amelia, Dad said I could ask you something important. You can ask me anything, sweetheart. Would it be okay if I called you Mom sometimes? I mean, I know you're not my first mom, but you love me like a mom does, and you take care of me and teach me things and make me feel safe. Amelia set down her coffee cup and knelt beside Sophie's chair, looking directly into those wise brown eyes that had seen both loss and hope with equal courage. Sophie, nothing would make me happier than being your mom. Your first mom will always be special and important, but there's room in families for all kinds of love. Sophie's hug was fierce and joyful, and when she whispered, "I love you, Mom," against Amelia's ear, it felt like the completion of something that had been building since that first turbulent flight, when a stranger's kindness had changed everything. 6 months later, on a warm Saturday in Central Park, Daniel and Amelia exchanged vows in a ceremony that reflected their unconventional journey to love. Sophie served as both flower girl and ring bearer, her confidence and joy evident, as she carried out her ceremonial duties with characteristic attention to detail. Lucas, now walking and chattering constantly, toddled between family members during the informal celebration that followed, delighting in the attention from relatives and friends who had traveled from across the country to witness their commitment to each other. "This is the strangest wedding I've ever attended," Harold Peterson observed to his wife during the reception. The bride is a pharmaceutical CEO. The groom is an engineer who works for her company, and they met when he helped calm her crying baby on an airplane. "It sounds perfectly romantic to me," his wife replied. "Love stories are always strange until you live through one yourself." The comment captured something essential about the path that had brought them together. The unpredictability of human connection, the way crisis could become opportunity, the truth that the most important moments often arrived disguised as ordinary difficulties. As the celebration continued around them, Amelia and Daniel found themselves standing slightly apart, watching Sophie teach Lucas how to blow bubbles, while other children gathered around to join the impromptu lesson. "No regrets?" Daniel asked, his arm around Amelia's waist as they observed their daughter's natural ability to create community wherever she went. "Only that it took so long to find you," Amelia replied. "But maybe we weren't ready for each other until we were. Maybe crisis was the only thing that could break down the walls we'd built around our hearts." The insight felt profound and true. Without the vulnerability of that airplane emergency, without Lucas's desperate crying and Daniel's impulsive kindness, they might have remained strangers passing through each other's worlds without ever recognizing what they could build together. "Sophie," Amelia called. "Come here for a minute." Sophie bounded over, her face glowing with happiness and excitement. "What is it, Mom? Your dad and I have something to ask you." Sophie's expression grew serious, recognizing the tone that indicated important family business. "How would you feel about having a baby brother or sister?" Daniel asked. Sophie's gasp was audible, followed by a shriek of joy that caused half the reception to turn and look in their direction. "Really? We're going to have another baby?" "We're going to try," Amelia confirmed. "We wanted to make sure you were excited about the idea before we started planning." "Are you kidding? This is the best news ever. Lucas needs someone to play with, and I've always wanted to be a big sister to more than one person." Her enthusiasm was infectious, and soon they were surrounded by family and friends, offering congratulations and sharing their own stories of growing families and unexpected blessings. Later that evening, after the celebration had ended and their guests had departed, the four of them sat in their living room watching the city lights twinkle outside their windows. Sophie was curled up next to Amelia on the couch, reading a book about space exploration, while Lucas played quietly with his toys on the floor. Daniel sat nearby, working on engineering sketches for his latest project while keeping one eye on Lucas's explorations. "This is perfect," Sophie announced without looking up from her book. "This is exactly what a family is supposed to feel like." Amelia looked around at the scene. Comfortable chaos mixed with deep contentment, individual pursuits happening alongside collective presence, the easy rhythm of people who had chosen to build something beautiful together. "Yes," she agreed, thinking about the desperate woman who had boarded a plane to Los Angeles 18 months earlier, convinced she was failing at everything that mattered. "This is perfect." Outside their windows, the city hummed with 8 million stories of struggle and success, loneliness and connection, dreams deferred and hopes fulfilled. But inside their home, 4 people who had found each other against all odds continued writing their own story. One of kindness returned tenfold of courage, rewarded with love of the extraordinary family that could emerge when strangers chose to care for each other without expecting anything in return. In her office the next Monday, Amelia looked at Sophie's airplane drawing, still prominently displayed, and now joined by dozens of other artwork documenting their life together, and smiled at the memory of the frightened woman who had once thought a crying baby on an airplane was the worst thing that could happen to her. It had turned out to be the best thing instead.